Hello, everyone. So my name is Antoine, this is Mike, and as Natasha said, we're going to be talking about NatWest Boxed journey to cloud cost efficiency. So with that in mind, essentially, we're excited to share our experience about kind of how we work to allocate and ultimately optimize our cloud costs within our Kubernetes-first environment. We'll be walking you through those challenges and the kind of solutions we encountered, and we'll first start with a rough kind of overview of our infrastructure, how things work. We'll then talk about our partnership with Datadog and how that worked, and then finally, we'll go over the different steps we took to allocate like 90+% of our costs at a service level, as well as set up reliable, kind of actionable alerting systems, as well as save a bit of money on the way along there. So with that in mind, let's get started. So as I said, my name's Antoine. I'm an engineering manager here at NatWest Boxed, and this is Mike, who is a platform engineer and tech lead for our team. Our team essentially is in charge of all things AWS, Kubernetes, and GCP. NatWest Boxed itself operates as a banking-as-a-service provider, so essentially we empower companies to offer financial solutions to their customers without having to do all the heavy lifting of obtaining a banking license and all that stuff. However, with all the benefits of the cloud and running this cloud-native platform, as I mentioned, we have some critical challenges around managing cloud cost effectively. This is especially true for platforms like ours, which are multi-tenant and operate across multiple cloud environments. Understanding and controlling those costs is what we'll be focusing on today. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave it to Mike to take you through our infrastructure.
Yeah. So we just want to set the scene on like what our infrastructure looks like and how that's made things quite challenging for us. We've generally got a whole bunch of cloud accounts across AWS and GCP. They're not all ours. I say ours, the core platform team. We have like 90% of the stuff, which is 90% of the cost. But we've also got some cloud accounts that are sort of owned and managed by the data engineering teams, the security teams, stuff like that. And that gets interesting. We've built a platform that's sort of Kubernetes first. What we're really aiming for most of our development teams is they work in Kubernetes, they get to deploy stuff there, they configure stuff through that. We make heavy use of like custom resource definitions so that everything can be done within Kubernetes. They don't have to use other technologies. And that lets deploy the whole service as its service plus infrastructure, everything. And yeah, we handle the underlying stuff in core platform. But we're very much trying to let teams manage their own things. They don't have to ask us for approval to do stuff. We want them to be able to look at their own things, manage the services, manage all the costs. So yeah, one of the things we want them to do is deal with their costs. So how do we do that for cost stuff? Overall, we've got our foundation engineering mission. That's the sort of business unit that contains core platform. At the top level, we've got Chris sitting over there. He's our green box. He manages the overall tech spend. He sets the overall budget, working with us to sort of predict what's going to be happening over sort of next year. And that's simple as it goes. But it gets interesting because while we're using Kubernetes, we've got the sort of multi-tenancy from our perspective. There's all these different teams running inside our one cluster. We've got a lot of shared resources too. We've got databases, Elasticsearch, networking stuff. Some cost allocations, quite simple. You take an S3 bucket, that belongs to a service. Great, costs are easy. Kubernetes, rather more difficult. You've got all of that shared infrastructure. And when we started our journey, we were looking at sort of AWS costs, and it was big bucket of EC2. That's not so helpful when you want to ask the teams, how much are you spending? And it's like, 3 pods. What's that in dollars? Doesn't work very well. So that was quite a significant hurdle at the front. And why do we care about this? Could we not just have one budget at the top and everyone respects the budget? Be nice in theory, but we want to actually have individual budgets so that teams know how much they're able to spend. We want to be able to look at things like how much does this business product cost. Can we take that and combine it with metrics in Datadog for like how many bank accounts there are, so we can get like a cost per serve for the bank account? And we couldn't do this before we started working with all the Datadog cost management. We started off with sort of AWS GCP viewing. We have all the billing technology there, which lets us see how much cloud resources cost. We can look at it sort of monthly basis. I don't know if any of you used it, but it's not been the best experience for us. AWS is not great. GCP is somewhat better. but it still didn't have that sort of Kubernetes-like magic, as Natasha was talking about earlier. So yeah, we did try a whole thing about using BigQuery, stuff all the cost data in there. That didn't go so well either. We didn't really have the sort of right abstractions, like the FinOps focus schema and stuff. It was a lot of manual work, and then it didn't really give us what we needed. So it was all a bit inefficient. We didn't really know what we were doing with stuff. We had budgeting difficulties. We didn't allocate resources efficiently to where we needed to be. We ended up with a bunch of urgent needs about this. We needed better cost allocation, particularly around Kubernetes. We needed to get a unified view of costs because we wanted to see, what's the cost for a service, not here's your cost in AWS, here's your cost in GCP, here's your cost in Datadog, here's your cost in PagerDuty. We wanted to be able to also have alerting, because it's one thing to have all of your standard Datadog monitors that say your service is down, but where's the monitor for your service just started costing 10 times the amount? Maybe you should do something about that. So yeah, we did something about that.
Indeed. So it was around that time of that failed GCP project that Mike mentioned, where we tried to set up all our costs in BigQuery that, well, fortuitously, Datadog got in touch, essentially. And so we had a first call with Natasha, who essentially told us that they were interested in us trialing the Cloud Cost Management product. So as a result, this partnership proved to be really timely and quite good for us. So you might know, as Natasha explained, essentially Datadog Cost Management is a suite of FinOps tools that essentially allow you to kind of break down and manage your costs. One of the advantages for us was that it fell right into an existing ecosystem that we knew very well. So we could reuse existing tags like the environment tag, the service tag, the team tag. We could use all the existing monitoring tools that we knew, as well as all the dashboarding and notebooking tools and stuff like that. And finally, as I mentioned, the partnership itself was quite serendipitous. Datadog got in touch just as we were kind of looking for the next thing. We established a real collaborative approach with Datadog, so we set up monthly calls with Natasha and her team to review our progress and discuss pain points, provide early feedback on new features and all that stuff. And it was very open and kind of an iterative collaboration. There was no rigid objectives beyond simply working together to improve the cost management capabilities that we had and kind of provide some feedback on Datadog's tools. So yeah, as I mentioned early on, Datadog reassured us that while they were initially focused on AWS, they planned to support other cloud providers, which was quite important for us. And the Datadog Cloud Cost product essentially allowed us to immediately start attributing costs at a service level using their tag pipeline feature. This was exactly what we needed to break down our costs with Kubernetes, as we mentioned, being our key starting point. Crucially, the collaboration allowed for a level of feature code development, which was really interesting. And through feedback, we were able to kind of work with the product roadmap and kind of identify bits that would be useful for us, as it were. So we leveraged key features from Datadog CCM to deliver the FinOps platform. The first, as I mentioned, was the Kubernetes cost allocation, the multi-cloud cost attribution, some of the cloud cost alerting features, and then finally the cloud cost recommendations. We made use a little bit, mostly to determine any cost savings from committed use discounts on databases and the like. With that in mind, I'm going to take you through a kind of brief overview of what the actual journey to cloud cost efficiency was for us. And we'll get started essentially by determining a set of goals. So some of you might or might not be kind of aware of the FinOps Foundation, but they've got a pretty decent framework to think about how you improve your costs going over time. And essentially, it starts with a crawl to walk to run framework. There are 3 key metrics you look at when you do this. And essentially, the first is cost allocation, which is, do you know where your money is going? 50% of your money is probably not good enough, and you're doing quite well if you can allocate about 90% of your costs at a service level. Committed use discount coverage, so not everyone might be familiar with these, but essentially it's a way of committing to 1 or 3 years of spend and get a discount on it. So essentially it shows that you're mature enough to know how to predict your costs and also that you're getting a good discount. The coverage of that over your kind of overall bill is an indicator of how well you're doing. And finally, we have what we call forecasting variance, which is a really fancy word to say, did you go over budget? So essentially, that was the one that we worked on last. And with that, I'll leave it to Mike to talk about how we managed our cost allocation.
Yeah, so it's one thing to just say you've got Cloud Cost Management product and then shove some data in there. But how are you going to make use of it and how are you going to actually do that well? Just in terms of tagging, we've got sort of end, we've got service, we've got team. You'll see those same tags throughout the Datadog product. We've also added a level of system on there. Internally, we're using Backstage for our service catalog, so we've aligned quite heavily with that. So Backstage has components, which are aligned directly with services, and we've also got systems, which are sort of wider groupings. We'll probably extend this further to domains at some point, so we can just sort of give those wider view of costs, be able to see things on a level that sort of upper management want, not just individual engineering teams. But how do we get those tags on there? We've obviously got loads of stuff in the cloud resources. We've got AWS objects, GCP stuff. We tag stuff where we can with service, and we tag it with env. But then we've got lots of stuff in Kubernetes where we have those tags on pod definitions, stuff like that. And we shove that cost in. We use the Datadog agent. The magic comes in and splits those costs up for us. The next level after that, we've got a bunch of custom rules in the tag pipeline feature. We add service tags to some of these sort of untaggable things. Like if you look in your GCP and AWS builds, you'll have things like support. Support isn't really aligned to any given service, so we put some labels on that so at least we can track it and put it against a team who gets to have the lovely job of dealing with it, and that ends up being us. And we've also done some interesting stuff about taking the Kubernetes nodes, and we tag Kubernetes nodes with their own service, but only for costs that didn't have it already. So while the Datadog feature will attribute sort of costs based on how much the pods use, bin packing's hard. You never actually fill up your nodes. So we can make use of tag pipelines to even tag that sort of spend that gets left over. And then we've talked about env and service, but we don't want to tag all of our cloud resources with teams. The business keeps changing things around. We keep hiring. Services get moved around. If you tag stuff with team, well, we had people do that for a brief bit, and then it got out of date almost immediately. So we definitely recommend against doing that. So what do we do instead? We take our backstage data. We've got one place where we can change ownership of stuff that's just based on GitHub code owners. You take a cron job, and that takes your data out of backstage, and we upload it to Datadog into a reference table. The tag pipelines feature lets us take those reference tables. We look up the service based on the tag and cloud cost data. And then we add the system and the team on from that. And then, if we change it in backstage, it just changes it across the board. And that's pretty cool. And then finally, we just add some team-level tags for some of those sort of DevOps accounts. Again, in the tag pipeline feature, we can make use of don't tag it if it's already got that tag. And that means that we have at least a broad overview of some of the costs that are owned by teams that have things that aren't individually tagged. And finally, we have lovely data, which we are getting to, 90% or so at the moment on actually how much it's used, which is pretty good. We're starting to, we've gotten rid of all the low-hanging fruit, and now it's a lot of weird esoteric edge cases for where does that cost belong, which we'll never get finished with probably. We'll just keep working, but it's an ongoing process. And yeah, that was sort of our journey there. We went from sort of 40-50% just on naive, shove the data in, what does it give us? Then we did the stuff with Backstage. We got to about 70-80%. We did that sort of unused cost allocation, the account stuff, and now we hit 90%. And we're pretty happy with that. We're still going to keep improving on it, but we've sort of moved on from this being a big focus of we've got to do all this work. But yeah, we have all this data. How did we save some money on it?
That is a very good question, Mike. Thank you. So essentially, the next way you essentially save money is mostly by making use of committed use discounts, as we mentioned. So that is the other metric that we look at in the kind of FinOps framework. As I mentioned, committed use discounts are essentially a commitment that you make to paying a certain amount of money for 1 to 3 years. It's a form of planning. And each cloud provider has their own version of it, essentially. So AWS has something called EC2 or compute saving plans, where you commit to spending on machines, effectively. And they also have something called reserved instances, which is the same thing, but for databases. GCP has something similar, which is called compute CUDs, or committed use discounts, which are similar. And they also have something called BigQuery slot reservations. Those are quite interesting. We've managed to make some good saving on those also. Now, luckily for you, I'm not going to go over all the spreadsheets and all the kind of intense calculating we did for this, because it's tremendously boring. But I'll give you an idea of what we achieved. Essentially, with that, we managed to get about coverage of roughly 90%. Coverage 85-90%, which is about a 45% cost saving. Now, bear in mind that most of our kind of compute resources are in the Kubernetes cluster in non-production environments, and those are all spot instances, so you can't actually use commute. You already have a discount on these, effectively. But yeah, managed to get these, which is quite good. We got some on reserved instances, so we got it for OpenSearch and RDS, and that's again a 45% cost saving. We've not got much on GCP quite yet. We've got a few machines, but not enough to really kind of get a decent commitment out of it. But we did manage to get about 40% on BigQuery, which was awesome, because it's very expensive. Yeah, it's difficult to measure exactly the saving on that one because of the way the billing comes in, but that's our guesstimate based on what it was before and what it was rather immediately afterwards. With that, I'll take us to our last metric, which is this forecasting variance piece. Effectively, do you know when you've gone over budget, and can you avoid that happening? This is the most important priority. Again, hello, Chris, in the stage. That was his favorite feature. And so if we falter here, essentially, we really risk running the business into the ground, so we need to make sure that we're aware of it. So what we did to counter this is we implemented what we call kind of reusable alerting mechanism, which I'll just walk you through just now. So effectively, our cost alert handling system works by essentially we created something called a cloud budget, which is a Kubernetes kind of custom resource definition. Someone in our team, Adam, affectionately calls it a cludget. We're not very good at naming things. But effectively, this object is just built up to kind of track and monitor costs for a specific account. What it does is it creates a Datadog cost monitor, and this kind of cloud budget object is owned by the budget owner of these sub-accounts. What happens is if ever that alerts get triggered, then essentially that sends an alert to a Slack channel, and this Slack channel is essentially observed by both the budget owner as well as the overall tech spend owner, i.e., hi, Chris. The idea is that this builds in a bit of accountability, but also ensures that communication is clear, open, and transparent at the time when the alert happens, and that essentially they can then work together to essentially beg for more money or determine how they're going to actually fix the system as it happens. This is kind of what it looks like in practice. This is the only bit of code we're going to show you today, so don't worry. This is a bit of YAML, which is this cloud budget object. As I mentioned, it's a Kubernetes object. You can see that it's got a couple of nice features, like a name, a description, which cloud provider it's for, the kind of accounts that it's going to apply to, as well as the budget limit, which is a certain value and has a warning threshold on it, emails that it might send an email to, and then it's also got what's called a budget forecast object. The budget forecast is similar to the limit, but it's really more for the team to keep track of. It's a way to mostly keep track of whether they're underspending as opposed to overspending. Obviously, we'd love to underspend, but if it's so low that because we've not predicted it well, that's also something we'd want to be aware of. That one's not mandatory, though. You'll see on the right-hand side the essential Slack message that is sent. And the reason why we kind of package this as a whole deal is because it comes with quite a bit of information that makes it easier for kind of the budget owners to self-serve the next steps. So it will give them a link to a couple of neat dashboards they can use to figure out where the costs are going, and then gives them a set of actions they can follow through. And then below that, you can see a conversation between myself, James Farlow, and again, Chris, who is, I'm sure, saying, good job on the overspend. Probably not saying that. But yeah, with that in mind, unfortunately, I actually can't really give you a good metric of what we've achieved in terms of budget forecasting, because our forecasting previously was not very good, and it's quite difficult to measure that as an outcome. So instead, I'm going to leave you with a call to action, and that is, take control of your costs. We'd recommend try out Datadog Cloud Cost Management. We found it really useful, quite good. It's a really powerful tool. If you have any questions on this, feel free to come talk to myself or Mike afterwards. Anything for cloud cost, FinOps, platform engineering, working with Datadog and how the collaboration works, we'll be happy to talk about it. I have one last slide, which I've been allowed to sneak in at the end, which is the most important one. We're hiring. Feel free to get in touch, talk to us later on, use the link. And with that, thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Cheers.